Niels, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it. Uh,
Of course.
the film is beautiful. I absolutely fell in love with it. It is such a wonderful piece. Where did Rose come from? Where did the film begin?
Well, of course, in some ways, it begins with my sister's illness. When I was 15 and she was 19, and my other sister, Kirsten, I gave them new names in the film. So Inga is really mine, Elizabeth, and
Mm.
Ellen is Kirsten, or Kirsten, as you say in this part of the world. But she was 17, and that's when it all started. But I mean, of course, I wasn't anywhere near even thinking about being a filmmaker at that time. But I think I always, in my many, many years, several decades of filmmaking, thought that one day I would write something about her illness. But I didn't want to write a typical illness film. So I never started writing until one day I was actually out. This sounds bizarre, but kayaking with an old friend of mine
Mm.
back in Denmark that I see occasionally. I mean, I live in LA, so I don't see him that often, but we've known each other more than a half a century, which is kind of scary. But we were kayaking down this river and talking about how my sister was doing, whom he has known since he was 6 years old.
Mm.
And we started talking about this crazy journey to Paris that my other sister and her husband took my mentally ill sister on in 97. And then suddenly, out of the blue, my friend says to me, "Why don't you make a film about that?"
Mm.
And the minute he said it, I knew it was a good idea, and I had never thought about it, even though it was right in front of my nose. And I tried to turn everything into film, you know. So I realized that I could actually write a film that was confined to these 8 days, and kind of like a road movie, although a bus road movie, and I could write something that would kind of show her going from being a person that people are like, oh my God, are we going to travel with this person for these 8 days? Till a person that they all really value because she has abilities that they don't have, and she has artistic stuff and language and all of that. So I could kind of portray her as a person instead of just a diagnosis. So that was really what started it all. I mean, I will say that the film became a lot funnier than I had anticipated because Inga kind of like took her own control, and every time or every other time she opened her mouth, she said something that created an absurd situation, and that I had not foreseen in a
Mm.
weird way. I actually thought that I was writing something, more dry, like Amour from Hannikin or something, but and it was actually an issue. It was quite fearful for me to put this film out because I was like, is the audience gonna understand? Are they gonna laugh with Inga? Are they gonna feel this love in this film? Or are they gonna think that I exploited her in some weird way? So, and given the time we live in, and I'm a kind of like older white heterosexual dude, I have to be really careful what I do and say, right, in this time and age. I'm just joking, but you know what I mean. Sometimes you feel like you have a target on your back. Or my joke is, if somebody found me in a ditch and shot, they would say he had it coming. But that's my Nordic side. We use a lot of dark humor. You know, and I think dark humor is in this film because, as my sister Kirsten said, her and I, in order to kind of handle the pressure that became on the family with our older sister being schizophrenic and suicidal and all those things. I think throughout our upbringing, we used a lot of dark humor about it to survive, which is typical for people in the North. And somehow I think that that is in the film. Not only about Inga, but also about a character like Skelbeck,
Mm.
who ends up, who's fascinated by military and order and all of that, and ends up, throwing his jacket down on Napoleon's coffin, which is his own personal Waterloo. So,
I love that scene. I don't think I've ever been so satisfied by a jacket being thrown in a film as it was in that moment.
No, and it is kind of unique, and it's somehow inspired by reality. There was this grumpy kind of teacher dude on the ride, and he lost his jacket down. It didn't land on the coffin, but it fell down below.
Really,
That's where I got the idea from. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, Vaughn in the film, whose real name is Per, and he had a fantastic memory about some of the people on this bus and what I mean. So I have like 7 hours of interview with my sister and my brother-in-law, and I kind of like took a lot of stuff from other times in Mount Elizabeth's life, and I put that into the film to make it more dramatic. So even though everything that happens didn't happen on the real trip, because this is a film, it's not a documentary, nearly all of it happened at some other time in her life. And to illustrate like the scene with the hedgehog um, happened when she was 20 years old, and she was driving this little moped, and she found this hedgehog, and she could not go on until some people from a farm came, and they actually helped her bury it,
wow.
understanding that this girl, there was something wrong with her, but they were very gentle about it. And that's what gave me the idea to saying the whole bus strands at this. They are stranded at this rest stop in Germany, the autobahn, until this problem is solved. And that's where the unnormal and the so-called normalness completely collide for the whole trip, right? My producers were like, this scene is 12 pages long. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and it holds water totally. But yeah, but it is a very long sequence from the minute she walks out of the public bathroom until they're back on the bus. It is like a good 10 minutes,
It, it
which is very unusual.
yeah, and it works. Like you said, it holds. But this is fast. Like the film really felt like an honest piece to me, but I didn't realize how rooted in truth it was. So, I mean, I got to ask, like, what was that process like then working with your sister and your brother-in-law and your other sister? Like, was that, were there things that they said, you can't put that on screen, or was everyone just said, you know what, just do it, just go for it?
Yeah, I mean, my sister, my so-called normal sister, Kirsten and husband, they're very resilient people. They're from the north. They're not easily thrown off, and they also. My sister is, until recently, she just went retired now, but she was the leader of a kindergarten after-school program for more than 30 years, and she's quite an institution. And Pierre, her husband, is also extremely resourceful with younger kids, and they had a school program that saved troubled children that couldn't even read when they were like 10 or 12 years old. Something they called the farm school, which is an experiment that was very successful. So they're resourceful. They're not thrown off, and it became a little bit of a family project in that sense. I think they, I don't know. I guess for some time they saw a film because it took me so long, because I've shot all kind of other stuff, and it really took me 5 years to write the script. And then we shot the film during COVID, actually, in the September 20, and Paris closed down right when we left, and the whole France closed down when we left Normandy. We had to get a private plane to fly the crew and our equipment out of France. The airports were closing. It was kind of like a very weird
Wow.
time. But I don't think there ever really was anything that was too something that they didn't want on screen. I think that we would discuss with Mount Elizabeth, what happened, and said, this is what really happened a year later, but I'm putting this into the film. And so yeah, it was a very interesting family or siblings cooperation, a very good one.
Mm.
I think in some weird way it brought all of us even closer. And we are pretty close, but we're also very open. I mean, we did an interview with a newspaper in Denmark where Maren Elizabeth, Kirsten and I was there, and
Mm.
Maren Elizabeth was telling all these things, and they, like it was, we don't, we're not embarrassing, we're not hiding anything, and me being a kind of like a public person in Denmark, I'm not hiding that I have a schizophrenic sister in that sense. It's, yeah, it's I think we're a little bit different in that sense. We yeah, at least that's what the reporter said. She never spoke to somebody who was like us.
And that tracks in the film because I'm gonna say, is it Inger? Am I saying it
Yeah,
properly?
yeah,
Yeah. She just says anything that's on her mind, and it's just out there.
yeah,
I think I'd like to strangle you, and it's
yeah.
like, oh, okay. Um, I,
But I mean, really in the film, a Vaughn is not too normal either, right? I mean, and he's not even. I mean, of course, he's a part of a family, but we're not blood related. And I mean, his family is a bit out there too, honestly. I mean, his brothers and stuff, they're all kind of fucking crazy, and that's what up in the north, I think the craziness is closer to the surface
mm,
than people in the cities who has learned to be polished. You know, I mean,
yeah.
and that craziness is very attractive to me. As a storyteller.
It comes out so beautifully. Honestly, I love that in his characters. I wanted to ask you about Princess Di because I don't know what now. Based on our conversation, I don't know whether that was the part of the story or not. But it's very interesting to hold up Ingar's journey with this fascination with Princess Di. I was wondering why you chose to root the story at that time frame.
Well, the thing is that in reality, they came to Paris a few weeks after Lady Diane had passed.
Oh, they did. Like they actually did.
Yeah. So
Okay.
in the real story, this was an element. And I strengthened that element because I felt that there's an interesting underlying connection between the beautiful princess being called the English Rose
Hmm.
and the schizophrenic woman with this inner beauty that is obsessed with a song called Rose and sings Bien Rose with Edith Piaf. And and I also realized that there's something I like when something happens that you cannot totally fully explain, and you as an audience has to interpretate that. Like when she puts Jacques' letter down
Hmm.
in front of the picture of the dead princess, it's a very bizarre moment. And whether she lets go of the love story and the illusion of coming back to Paris and finding out that, there's all these weird connections. Like when she meets Jacques, she says, "Am I still your rose? Is my
Hmm.
smile still like golden sun?" And which is the weird character that is actually the real name of Mount Elizabeth's, kind of like invisible
Hmm.
person that has been following her for years. So it kind of all comes to this crunch point, and and of course, in the film, that leads to this attempt of whether it's a suicide or
Hmm.
turning off the voice in your head, or this voice that telling you you're not worthy and you should just go die, or you should, like this degrading voice, degrading, demanding, condescending voice. I mean, and that so I think that the collision between the terrible tragedy of the public tragedy of this iconic character that Diana was, and then this little person that's Inger, there's I don't know, there's so many things that is connected, and you can interpret it in so many ways that I think is I think there's also an interpretation from my side that any normal person that came there and looked at, this is where Lady Diana died, well, maybe if you go into their life, it might in some ways be as fascinating as Lady Diana's, even though she was this royal public figure. But but I hope that I was trying to do it gracefully in a way that I certainly wouldn't I wouldn't want to, what do you call it, do something disrespectful to Diana. I think the film in that sense balance, you know, I mean, if somebody I don't know what they watch, but if her sons ever saw the film, I would want it to be respectful in that sense, And I think the film balanced that. There's a great sadness around her death and Inger's low point at that moment. That kind of like, yeah, that's the lowest point of the film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the presentation of Diana is not a negative presentation of her at all. It's just it's a collective grief.
Yeah, and then you of course have Vaughn's morbid fascination of wanting
Yeah.
to see where she died. And Vaughn, and I mean, the males in this film kind of represent being drawn to war and terrible, like tragedies or terrible things like accidents and war.
Yeah.
And that's why they're obsessed with the D-Day Museum in the Normandy. And Vaughn comes to some kind of acknowledgement that maybe that is not always a good, what do you call it, desire to be led by, to follow. I mean, that fascination you have to curb, which I think is a very interesting. It's a very interesting acknowledgement for men to. We had this joke around the film when men over 50 becomes quiet and they sit and watch BBC documentaries about World War II and they stop talking. I mean, it's like, and there's a certain thing about that comes into like the only time that Skilbeck and Baum is in total agreement is when they are angry at the bus driver and guide that he
Yeah.
fucked up them getting in, and they're suddenly they are absolutely aligned, like two men against an outer enemy. And I love that moment. There's a moment when Anders, that plays Mount, looks over on Skilbeck and nods, and then he's like starts to attack, and it's very carefully designed in a two-shot. I think it's one of the few times that they are in a two-shot, and all the criticism is raining down over poor Ole,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's kind of like a favorite moment of the male characters in the, and it's people from the north, you gotta love them. It's kind of like what was it, the British filmmaker, oh god, what's his name, The Hand That Shook the Barley and Angel's Dust, and he's a very known filmmaker. The name will come to me, but he always talks about that he only wants to make films about the working class because the upper class doesn't have any humor. And I think that's a very good. I mean, you know him, but I just can't remember his name right now. But that's a very good quote, and there's something about that. There's something about the humor and the warm hearts that you can find in the province in the north. That's just a good foundation for filmmaking and storytelling in a weird way.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm a fan of dark humor. It plays out. Uh, Niels, honestly, the film is beautiful. I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for the time. We're out of time, but I really appreciate it, the chance to chat, and I wish you the best.
Okay, same to you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was a pleasure talking to you as well. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye bye.